Hey, welcome to Conversations with my dear friend, Jeff Conway. My name is Susan. This is A Different Kind of Walk. Hey friends, we are focusing on peace this season, and in the spirit of peace, Jeff and I have turned our attention toward the political sphere and how our presidential elections in recent history have affected division in our country. We would like to give you hope that it doesn't have to be this way, and that the world will not end, no matter who wins, come November 5th. And to that purpose, we have posted two separate interviews, one with a voter for Donald Trump and one with a voter for Kamala Harris. Please note that Jeff and I don't necessarily agree with everything our interviewees say here, and we will always advocate for your right to vote for whomever you choose. Enjoy the episodes.
So, yeah, I was actually trying to remember when you and I met, DeShauna, but before that, we did not plan this when we decided to go this direction with some interviews on political thoughts and peace. But it turns out that it's two of my close friends who we are interviewing. Greg, who's voting for one candidate, and DeShauna here, who's voting for the other. And I love you both dearly and can walk with you closely. And so that's what we are trying to encourage with other folks also in their communication with each other in this last month of heavy political season. So DeShauna and I both worked in the same program in the education department of the University of Oregon. It was called Escape, every student caring about personalized education. That's the acronym ESCAPE. Did I get that right? I think I did.
You absolutely did.
So I just kind of stumbled into that program with Chuck Fligger, one of my fraternity brothers, said, "Hey, I should try this out." And I'm thinking that's where we met, not around campus, is my guess. So
although we had a lot of mutual friends, so we may have met through some of my sorority sisters.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, I had a lot of friends. Me being your senior by 1 year, I had a lot of friends who ended up being your sorority sisters and friends. So yeah, thank you very much for doing this. Thank you for being a part of my life. You are an incredibly bright, thoughtful, empathetic person and have been an important part of my journey. So, and you've been a part of that since probably 1979, 1980, somewhere in there. So thank you for joining us today. You had a life before you met me, if you can believe that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, how you grew up, what your thoughts were back there, and what brought you to school in Oregon?
So I grew up in southwestern Idaho, not far from Boise, and my mother had gone to high school there, as did my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. Interestingly enough, my mom and dad met at the University of Oregon. They were actually students at both the University of Oregon and Northwest Christian College. And so, but they landed back in Caldwell, Idaho, and Dad worked for my grandfather. He had a retail lumber yard. And to say that I was in a very conservative area is kind and polite. There was only one way to do things. We all attended, this is the church that my grandpa built. This is the one we go to, and so, we went to, it's called the First Christian Church. And I had lots of classmates that were there. We also had a huge number of Mormon families and Catholic families. So as you can see, it was fairly conservative. And I remember my mom laughing one time later when I had, revealed, it was like coming out that I was a Democrat, that she said, well, we all need a token Democrat in the family. Nana was that. And I said, no, I didn't know.
So that's her mother?
Her mother.
Ah.
And I am sure knowing my grandmother, who didn't know how to write a check or drive a car or any of that stuff, and my grandfather died fairly young. It surprised me a little bit, and I had to laugh. I thought, there's a reason I love my Nana. But, so it was always sort of this, well, Dad would say, she went to the University of Oregon and, they did it to her. And I said, Dad, you went to the University of Oregon, so that doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. But it was always sort of this cheerful ribbing. I had to go vote because I had to cancel you out. And, those kinds of things. But there was never anything contentious. I knew the values that my family holds dear. And I, have the same values. We grew up in the same place. Mm-hmm. I just chose, when I was exposed to more options. In fact, I remember 1980 was my first presidential election. And if I recall, it was Reagan and Carter. And I voted for John Anderson, the independent. Because I couldn't be a Republican, but I wasn't quite a Democrat yet. So it was one of those things where I'm testing the waters a little bit. And there were a bunch of us that did that. But I think for me, it was more about priorities. And for me, I always think about the Republicans and my dad and my mom talking about the fiscal responsibilities and, Reaganomics and all those kinds of things. And I was always more concerned about civil rights and people and human rights and what about women and what about children. And so it's not that they didn't have similar beliefs. It's just my priority was stronger that way. And that's kind of how I always looked at it. The kind of work that Jeff and I were doing even in college was really community centric. It was really about taking care of each other. It was, we volunteered in classrooms and community service agencies. And so it exposed me to people that I'd never been around.
It was the work of the educational program that we worked in that opened us both up.
Absolutely. We were privileged to work with some really wonderful graduate students, and we had a professor in common who we just lost him this last year. And he was my friend till I talked to him weeks before he passed, and Jeff, I know, has had many conversations with him as well over the years. And he sort of exposed me to a world that was really different and reminded me that there's a lot more common ground in the world than there is not, and that we need to love and respect each other for what we are now. I think that's, I have to remember that this is who I am now. I don't want to be high school DeShauna. I don't necessarily want to be college DeShauna. This is who I am now. I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent. I've had a lot of life experiences, good and bad. And I do have sometimes almost too much empathy, but I do have a lot of empathy for folks in the world and have tried my best to help their journey. So my professional career has mostly been as a fundraising professional in nonprofit organizations. So marketing, fundraising, administration, but working with organizations like Habitat for Humanity and National MS Society and Boys and Girls Clubs. So that kind of stuff.
Nice.
And I'll highlight, she was an elder in the Presbyterian Church also.
Yes, I was.
So in this season, what have you found to be most challenging in communicating with people that have different ideas than you do?
A lot of challenges. I think the shift for me is that it has become so much right now that I'm right and you're wrong. There's no finding that common ground has gotten harder and harder. And I think for me, it has tainted the way that I talk about things. I was laughing a little bit. It's like, I really do kind of feel like I'm coming out as a Democrat, because as a fundraiser, you certainly can never share any political views, because, your biggest donor is likely to have opposite beliefs. And, you've got to be able to love them all. And so I think that it's interesting. I have never really been political in a sense, but it also has made me realize my naivete in thinking that people think like me. My dad, as he aged, became very one-sided in his thinking, and he was never like that growing up. He was always the voice of reason, the calm guy that, mom would explode and dad would say, okay, what's wrong? Let's talk about it. It's like, and so my dad was an Army officer, retired Army officer. And I remember saying to him, I said, Dad, growing up, you always talked to me about the importance of being an officer and a gentleman. And I said, and I always respected you as that. You were always a gentleman. That was, he was always the one that would, rescue his guardsmen from wherever they were. And he was, taken in. We had a steady stream of stray kids living in our house. And I said, I don't understand how you can support a man that is neither. Mm-hmm. And for the first time in probably 20 years, my dad had nothing to say. Mm. That was one of our last conversations. And it was like, I understand why you don't like this side, but I don't understand, it's become less about parties and more about people. And I think that's the difference too.
Right. Yeah, I would think from whatever political perspective you come from or have been drawn to, it would be interesting to challenge ourselves, Democrat, Republican, whichever way you're voting, to see how much of this is personality driven today, because so much of our society is personality, celebrity driven.
Yes. Yeah.
From both sides there. It's just an interesting point, I think, for all of us to examine how much are we being influenced by that.
I just lost my mom this year, and I was thinking about one of the conversations we had in 2015 or 16, whenever the world shifted, and the election results had come in, and I was absolutely distraught. And some of it is I was working for a musical theater company. There were a lot of people directly impacted by things that were being said or rights that were threatened. And my mom and I had an incredibly heated conversation, in part because my mom's the strongest woman I've ever met, and she couldn't vote for a woman. She ended up not voting. And I said, Mom, I think it struck me that there are a number of women in my family and close group that I'm like, what do you mean you can't vote for a woman? Yeah, you can. So, I think that's been really hard, is that I sort of woke up and went, oh my gosh, all these people, they don't think like I do. When did that happen?
So that was 8 years ago. How did you and your mother work through those issues? Were they just put aside? Did you talk about them more? What happened there?
So when she started to cry, I'm like, oh my God, I made my mommy cry. So I hung up the phone and I went to her house, And we talked about it, and I said, Mom, I love you anyway. I can't make this a family issue. So we just have to agree to disagree. And I would rather not discuss specific things. I mean, we had a rule at Thanksgiving, my brother's family and our family, it's like, we don't talk politics. Nobody's going to be totally right and nobody's totally wrong. So let's just not. Reminding ourselves, at least for me, it's like, I love you guys and you're my family. And I need that, and I think this calendar year has really pointed that out to me in a lot of ways. I was telling Jeff earlier, I lost both my parents this year. And my brother and I are it. We have 6 children between us. And, so we had to come together.
Not together.
What?
Said you have 6 children between you and your brother.
Correct. I had a different spouse, as did he. He has 4 daughters. I have a daughter and a son. And we're really girl heavy in our family. So I think that's part of, for me, why so many of these issues, it's like, God, you're a girl dad. But that's, but we had to remind ourselves that we are it. I mean, we're the oldest part of our family now, it's like, as he reminds me, I'm the oldest member of the family. But it's overwhelming because you want to be the mentor and I want to share all this stuff. And then I realize, like, they're all adults. They don't want to hear what I have to say. Hopefully it will soften. I don't know that it'll change, but hopefully it will soften is my hope.
In the election between Trump and Hillary Clinton, yeah, my mom literally we were driving in the car somewhere and having a very good, pleasant, good conversation. But I did just ask her flat out, like, are you planning on voting for Trump? And she was like, well, I'm not voting for Hillary. And I was like, oh, okay. And to be fair, I never asked her. I don't think it was necessarily because she was female, though that might have been partly in there. I think the bigger thing was like, so my husband's from the East Coast. His assessment of Bill Clinton and his presidency was like, oh, he went over and he like saved Ireland. He like built up all this economy and all these amazing programs, and like he was economically wonderful and positive. My understanding of Bill Clinton was, oh, he's an adulterer. So, and that was it. That's the only thing that mattered.
Right.
And so it's possible that my mom's ick feelings are like, well, no, she's associated with him. So there's no way I'm voting for her. But I never asked that question. So I don't know.
It's interesting. One of the things that my mother didn't like, my mom, gotta remember, we lived in Fort Benning, Georgia, when I was like 3 or 4. I was also born in Southern California, but then we ended up in Georgia for about a year and a half. And, Mom had all her literal training as an officer's wife. This is how you behave, I mean, things like, I remember her saying, well, you can't smoke with gloves on. I'm like, but you don't smoke anyway. So why? I don't get it. Like, okay. But those are just like, and you only cross your legs at the ankle. And it was all this sort of interesting demeanor, stuff like which forks go where. And that carried through. I mean, my mom was always, the hostess. We all followed Emily Post. We all did, we all had to know where things went. And I remember her biggest criticism about Hillary Clinton was that she wasn't ladylike. She was brash and she wore pantsuits.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at my mom and I'm going, you're describing me. I'm brash. I wear pantsuits. I don't get it. Well, but you know how to be. And I said, she certainly knows how to be a lady.
Right.
I said, I don't understand. But I think it was that, she's trying to compete with men. Yeah. We're forcing her to compete with men. That doesn't mean she's not a woman. So, but you talked about me being an elder in the Presbyterian Church. My father, actually, he went to Northwest Christian College to be a pastor and then took a different route. But he and mom both really believed that women's roles in the church, were really the deaconess. They were the helpers. They were the church secretary. But they weren't the pastors, and they certainly were not elders. And at one point, my dad's mother, who died at 94, went to the same church. She was an elder in her church. His sister was an elder in her church, and I was an elder in mine. And my dad was so proud, he couldn't stand it. And I said, well, gosh, mom should do that. And he goes, no, I mean, that's good for you guys. He was just so proud of the fact that we were all elders, and isn't that just wonderful? And he's just, my friend Laura used to always say, Bill's just busting buttons, But I said, well, what about women pastors? Oh, yeah, I'm like, my favorite pastors are women. So it's interesting. I mean, it's like there's this roadblock from growing up in the 50s.
So not only your family, but you probably are around other folks who have different political opinions than you. Even living in Eugene now, have those gone okay in this season of the election? Have those been tense? Have friendships been pushed at all?
Well, most of the friends that I spend time with, or we're fairly like-minded. Let's put it that way. I don't spend a ton of time with. I don't spend really any time with people I grew up with a couple of exceptions. But I found social media to be really distracting. It's been really tough. I basically have had to. I don't want to unfriend people. I just think that feels rude. But I hide a lot of posts, and I just don't look at Facebook or Instagram like I used to. And they're very opinionated, both sides in a sense. And I think what bothers me, it's not about issues. It's about poking fun at the opponents. It's about being disrespectful. It's about making jokes of things that aren't funny, and using vocabulary that I just can't use. I mean, it's those kinds of things that are hard for me. I could understand if it was just about issues. I mean, I wouldn't agree, but I could certainly be more tolerant. And so I found myself being as intolerant as I'm accusing my friends of being. So I just have to kind of check out. The intolerance, it goes both ways. It's tough.
So the checking out part, and I don't know if I have done that in the past couple of years. I've never been a part of social media, any form of social media. But I heard people talking about it a lot more in the two previous elections.
Yes.
Now, DeShauna, you don't know this yet, but Susan could actually be both of our children.
Yeah, I did know that.
So,
they're the same age as my kids.
Susan, to you, I mean, would you agree with that statement? Is there less conversation in this election than the two previous ones about social media fights and just all the tension I was hearing about in those two previous national elections?
I definitely do not think that there's less now than there were before. I
Okay.
think more and more people are doing what DeShauna was saying and leaving it because it
Mhm.
has become so hurtful and so seemingly intentionally trying to make you mad.
Being
And
cruel.
yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
being cruel,
Mhm.
totally blanking on the word that I'm trying to use.
Supralapsarianism,
And
anti-disestablishmentarianism.
anthropomorphism. No, it's not any of those.
Good that I got all those syllables out on those
I
words.
know. Okay, so in my job, completely outside of this, we have a PR person, and I love her. She's wonderful, and I think she does an incredible job. But the suggestions that she makes are based on what will be successful in the algorithm or social media or whatever. And I really don't like those suggestions because they're like, okay, let's get some shock value in here because you'll get more likes, you'll get it seen more, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But when you apply that strategy to this topic, it's actually just putting more evil out into the world. It's hurting people. It's causing confusion and pain. It's breaking relationships. It's teaching people or encouraging people to be unlistening and unempathetic and unkind. And that's just anti the spirit of God, if I'm honest. So yeah, I do think a lot of people, whether it's people my age, leaving and like whether that's intentional or whether that's just like you were saying, they've found other social media forms that they like better. I don't know. I left in general altogether. I don't really do social media, but it's because
Mhm.
of that. It's just gross and not worth your time.
Well, it's so much of my adult life, and this is, talking to somebody who's spent a lot of time in therapy. So much of my life has been focused on everybody but me.
Mhm.
And, and some of that's natural because, you're a parent or you're a spouse or whatever, or their needs seem to be greater at the moment or whatever it is. But for me, I worked really hard to be DeShauna again. And I worked really hard to appreciate myself and to feel good about what I've done and what I'm doing, any legacies I may have left, those kinds of things. And I think, having lost my parents has really put that into the forefront. It's like, what are people going to remember? So I think for me, listening to all that negative stuff all the time and seeing it, and I mean, it's just hurtful put downs or whatever it is. Like and it's not one-sided. And I think that bothers me as much as anything. It's like I can say, oh my gosh, they are so wrong, but we are too. And the fact that there's a they and a we in a country that should be celebrating diversity and celebrating joy and celebrating all the reasons that we have to live the lives that we do, it's so apparent that we are blessed. And why are we squandering that? I don't understand. And I think that's for me, it's like I feel like we're squandering the stuff that we worked so hard for. Women's rights were really at the forefront when I was in high school. Legislation was passed that at the time I didn't fully understand. So I grew up thinking that, of course women are in control of their bodies. And of course women can have their own credit cards. I don't understand, but it wasn't that long ago that, I had to have my dad's name on a credit card or my husband's name on a credit card. I couldn't open my own account. It was the 70s. And the same thing, with pro-choice initiatives and, all those things that we have taken for granted the last 40 years, and that women my age and older worked so hard for. And I think that's what's so hard is I don't want my granddaughters to have to fight for it again. It was painful. That's where I come into issues as opposed to personalities. I definitely need some reassurance that what we worked so hard for matters.
Hmm. we asked this question specifically of our other interviewee, and so I'm just going to try to make sure I have the exact same question answered, which is just like, what do you like about the candidate that you are voting for? And as you've thought about different people that you voted for in the past, which you've already mentioned some, like, what do you find influences you? Is it loyalty to your party? Is it issues like abortion or immigration or national security or climate change? Or is it identity connection with the candidate? Or do you feel like it's other things?
So specifically talking about Kamala Harris, I like that she's confident in who she is. I like that she doesn't make apologies for being a woman of color, for having succeeded. I like that she comes across as sincerely caring. She doesn't mock people, or although, once in a while, some of her rebuttals against Trump have been a little pointed. But for the most part, she sticks to the issues. She's a little bit younger than I am, but not enough that we didn't grow up in similar climates. So she sees issues the same way I see the importance of those issues. And you mentioned some of those with abortion rights, with just women's rights, with equality, with diversity, with immigration laws, with all of those things where, you look at people first.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful.
So there's identity in there. There's also the issues is how you're connecting. I do have to share with you how jarring it was to hear you say that the woman running for president is younger than you.
Yeah, it is a little jarring, isn't it?
She did that wrong. And then I'm like, no, she didn't. Oh my God.
No, she's under 60.
60 is not shocking to be president. That we're older than 60 is what is shocking.
No, I get it. I get that. Especially when I realize that we've known each other over 40 years. We've known each other longer since before you were born, Susan.
Regardless of political party, anyone who votes for someone into the presidential office who is younger than them, I'm very proud of you. Because even at the age that I am, all new musicians are like 20. And my bartenders that I'm encountering are like 22, and I'm like, it's really hard to not just be like, oh, hey, cutie, to not just belittle people because they're so much younger than you, to actually look at them like, no, oh no, you're an adult. Like, and you can have responsibility. And in fact, I can look up to you and all this stuff. I'm like, wow, I'm really learning to do that and to respect my kids too. Like, I'm trying to discipline myself to do that already because my kids are going to be adults sooner than I'm ready for. So yes, kudos.
There's a lot of things, and especially as a girl mom and as a girl grandma in particular, there are a lot of things that I don't want to carry forward. And so, I am constantly aware or reminded by my daughter too of what message we should be sharing with the next generation and how, to build confidence. I made the youngest one here, my 5-year-old granddaughter, made some comment about wanting to play football. This is a girl who won't even play soccer because, she really just wants to be a cheerleader. But she, and I said, well, there aren't a lot of girls that play football. And, I said, you're not very big. And her mom just immediately says, you are absolutely big enough to do whatever you want. And I'm like, shoot, she's right. I think I need to be sharing. Like, oh, I blew it. Sorry, tiny one, you can do whatever you want.
So it's so good to have those reminders, because like, even when we're like get upset with our parents for not supporting us, like, it's so easy to just repeat what they would say, So yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
So we met at school, and somehow in the midst, we certainly became close because of the educational program we
Sure.
were a part of. I have the fondest memories every quarter, or was it twice a year, that we went away on a retreat
Our retreats. Yeah.
with Dennis, our professor, all the graduate teaching fellows, whatever we were called as undergrad staff. But, our background is so much about listening, empowering.
Mm-hmm.
Perspicacity was that big word in empowering,
Mm-hmm.
right? That it was listening to somebody first before responding, making judgment, making response,
Mm-hmm.
and having the giftedness with a person to point them in a direction that might be helpful for
Mm-hmm.
them. I think that was an incredible gift that we received in our undergraduate education. It was the most important gift for me. It's where I began learning and loving to learn that hasn't
Mm-hmm.
stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And in the midst of politics, in the midst of family dynamics, in the midst of church dynamics, in the, all the different kind of things that you could say, I've always wanted to stay positive, probably accused of being Pollyanna. In fact, Melanie, who preached at one of my installation services for the church I was at in Texas, she preached there and warned them that I was somebody that wore rose-colored glasses. And I think that as time has gone on, I heard this quote said, "I do not want to see the world through rose-colored glasses. I want the world to be rose-colored."
Mm.
And when
I
I
like
heard
that. That's you.
that's the maturing of the rose-colored glasses, not being
Yeah.
Pollyanna, but wanting the best for everyone. And folks just don't get that today when I say that. There's got to be an edge in there somewhere that if I want this for that person, then I have to knock down this person or that situation in a different way. And I just don't think that's the way we were raised educationally
No.
uh,
No.
at school, that we can desire the world to be rose colored and do that authentically, and particularly because of our faith, that we can do that and see that and understand that. So thank you for being a part of that journey with me.
Thank you. One of the other things we learned too was all about consensus, if you remember.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah.
There was not a decision made in that program that we would spend hours because we had to come to consensus. You didn't get to vote which way you wanted to go. We had to reach consensus. And I think that maybe that was my Pollyanna thing too. It's like, I thought the world worked that way.
Yeah.
Let's all sit down and talk about it and come to a solution that works for everyone. And, it's like, there's no consensus anymore.
Right. And consensus for us, and I don't know if this is the full definition of what Webster's would have, but consensus for us meant that when the choice was made after those long, hard meetings of coming to consensus, you are 100% behind that choice that was made. That was a good thing to struggle through. And I certainly used that in training the elders, the leadership of the churches that I served.
I was going to I'd say Presbyterians love that kind of stuff because, man, I don't think I ever went to a session meeting that wasn't 3.5 hours long.
Yeah, but I mean, if you can it's not a gag order. It's not like, well, you just can't talk about it after. It's that, no, we're going to sit here until we've found a
Until your heart's
solution
there.
that everyone is on board with. Like, and that's hard.
I think we all came out on the other side stronger, feeling like we'd been heard. I mean, that was, I think, part of it was, all voices were heard. There wasn't a voice that prevailed. Just because you're loud doesn't make you right.
So this actually goes perfectly into what my last question was going to be, which was just, what are your hopes for our country? And that you can answer that based on specific issues or in terms of the divisiveness that we're experiencing.
So I think that we have to continue to move forward as a country, as people, as cohorts, whatever, and we have to figure out a way to come to consensus and move forward. And I think what's been really difficult is I felt that was easier other election seasons. I may not have voted for George W., but I supported him. And what's been really difficult for me is that the last 2 election cycles, there's still half the country that doesn't agree. So I think that I would really like for us to move forward in unity and come to a place of understanding, to cohabitate and thrive rather than just surviving day to day. And I just have a really tough time with the lack of civility. And I really have a tough time, as I said to my father, you need to behave like ladies and gentlemen. We need to behave in a way that we're not embarrassed on the world stage. I remember being in Europe shortly after Trump was elected. And I mean, you got comments from every taxi driver it was interesting. And, I was sort of like, oh God, don't blame me. I mean, oh, wait, I am that weird American, so, you don't want to be on a world stage for the wrong reasons.
We don't realize how much a symbol we are to the world. Right. Well, I don't want to be a symbol to the world. Well, you should want to be a symbol to the world because what we have is an incredible gift.
Right. And it's been tarnished in recent years. And I think that's really tough for us. I want to polish the star. I want to shine again. So maybe that's me going forward. It's like having just gone through 70 years worth of stuff of my parents, I spent a lot of time polishing silver lately. So maybe that's it.
Yeah, no, that's not Pollyanna. That's going forward, I believe, in a healthy way. That's beautiful. Let's shine that star and let's remember the gift we have and continue to bring that. Amen.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It was a delight
to Susan. You. I love you, Jeffrey.
Hey, I love you. Can you do me a favor and drive over to the stadium and just remind the boys that even though we took down the big monster, Ohio State, don't relax too much.
No, and Dan Lanning's my neighbor. So.
Oh, really?
Oh. Yeah. His youngest kid's at the same elementary school as my granddaughters. But he's 38 years old.
Wow. So he's older than Susan.
No, he's my age. Like that's how.
Oh, you hit that. All right.
My daughter's 35. Will be 35. Yeah. Thank you for letting me do this, Jeff. It was fun.
Oh, not letting you. It was an honor. Thank you very much.
All right, sweetheart. I love you.
All right. Go Ducks. Bye-bye.
Go Ducks.
Thanks for joining us for A Different Kind of Walk. Until next time, live well.